Hello everyone and welcome to Dell EMC Networking OMNM Tech Talk. This is Bill Acevedo. Today we're going to talk about application logs and troubleshooting, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A session. So let's go ahead and get started. So today, again, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the OMNM runtime logs, meaning the logs that we see during the normal operation of OMNM. Now, I want to first start off by saying we generally do not recommend that users necessarily go through these additional steps to troubleshoot the application. It takes a little bit of expertise to understand the logs. And so what we do recommend generally is that the users execute what's called a get logs command, and then send that on to support at DellOMNM.com or TSC at DoradoSoftware.com. And then we can, we're in probably a better position to analyze those logs. As I mentioned, they do require some familiarity with Java, database, and some web front-end type exceptions that are not normally easy to understand unless you know a little bit more about the application. It also helps us to identify the root cause, and we're a little bit more attuned to how to do that. So generally what I want to do is I want to first show you what get logs is, and so let me bring up a session here. And so normally when you do want to gather all the log files, you're just going to type in this command get logs and just press enter. And what you're going to see is a little bit of a dump of information, but at the very end it's going to tell you where this file is located. And so you see here that is located in basically the install directory, Dell OpenManage Network Manager, and there's a file called logs.jar. That's the file that you want to send to us, and or you want to review if you're going to review the logs. And so what does that look like? So let me go ahead. I have one up here. I actually moved this over to a Windows box, just so we can open up in WinZip fairly easily. And so just at a high level here, what you see is some basic information that we gather. We gathered all log files. Some of this is, again, more developer related with information, class files, that sort of thing. But the main ones here to know are, well, there's an install logs. If you want to look at installation type logs, those will be here in the install directory. We also have this log directory, which is going to cover the application server log. We'll see this in more detail, but this is all the historical application server logs. In the logs directory, you're going to have more installation related type logs. Some of these are database related on how we create the database, and those might be useful if there's an installation problem. There's MySQL logs in the MySQL directory, and then the Tomcat directory, we're going to see the front-end web server type logs, so things you might see if you see odd things with the web server. And then again, we have the setup logs down here, app setup log, database setup, and install log. These are some more install logs that you can review. Today we're going to focus on the web server logs, app server logs, database logs, and go from there. Generally, when you're investigating issues, you generally want to start with the database connectivity. If your database isn't working, nothing's going to work, and so you want to establish that that's working first, and then move on to the application server logs, and then the web server logs. And when reviewing these logs, if you're reviewing them live on the machine, what we want to do is we want to use this tailf command, and I'll show you how to use that. And what that allows you to do is it actually allows you to see the log as it's running and data is being collected. And this is a primary use because you can actually correlate a particular action with an error, and by doing so, you're able to quickly identify, hey, when I do this action, I'm seeing this error. This is the most likely cause of that particular problem. And another tidbit here is you always want to start with the first exception in the log, not the last. Generally, you can have a cascade of exceptions, and it can be quite long. And if you start at the bottom, it's not going to be real useful until you see the very first exception that gets thrown. The final thing we're going to look at today is there may be cases where you've isolated an issue down to a direct device to OMNM type interaction, and we need to know what's going on at that level. There's this topic we'll show you called OMNM CLI Trace. It's a utility that you can use to see the actual interaction between a device and OMNM to try to troubleshoot issues. Okay, the first thing here is the database logs that we want to check first. And so here's where you go, this install directory, OR3rd MySQL data. is where the logs are stored. And so let me show you that. And so what I've also put here is another piece of information that might help you in environments where you don't know where the customer has installed it. This variable here, it's called OWare user root, just an internal variable, will automatically put in the install path, and then we see the OWare third MySQL data here. And so we'll go to that directory, and I'll show you the tail command. These files are generally going to be called hostname.error for the database. And we're going to talk about VI and the tailf command as well. So let me bring up that screen that I had here. So I think I skipped one here. I'm going to back up just a second here. First thing I wanted to show you before we look at the actual logs is show you some simple utilities you can use to actually troubleshoot the database. First of all, let's just test to see that the database is up. So this MySQL-u root p Dorado is the default username and password on the database. We recommend that these get changed, so you may use different values, but if you give this command, you can quickly see if the database is up or not. So I'm going to just show you what that looks like here. So I'm giving the command, and you quickly see that it's basically giving you MySQL information. This is a good sign that the MySQL database is up. Second one you want to try is an internal command. I'm going to do exit on this. And there's this command here called pingdb-u. This is another password that we use, OWare-p Dorado. This is an internal command that's going to go look at the install.properties file, and it's going to spit out this information that you see here. Ultimately, you'll see pingdb completed successfully. And this is valuable because it tells you that the database is up and running, and that should not be, you can go on to the next step if there's an additional issue here. So you see here we get back the environment that it's in, the IP address, and basically it says the database was pinged successfully. And again, it goes to the install.properties to use parameters that point to the database and to execute this command. So it gives you some useful information here. So that's how you can kind of do an initial test on the database. The one I just mentioned about the logs, you can also go to a directory here, and I'm going to show you that as well. So I'm doing a change directory to my install directory, OWare third MySQL data. And I'm doing ls here. And so what you're going to see are these files that are basically named by your host name. Mine happens to be synergy.domain.int, and this is an error file that you'll typically see if there's some sort of a problem on here. And so I've talked about a few things here to look at these files. You can do a tail -f. And what that'll do is it'll start looking at the file. There's only one line in this file. I just started my server here, but you're not going to see much on this one. But that's you would just tail it, and as things happen, you would see these exceptions scroll through. So maybe this isn't a good one to show the tailf and how to use tail. So we'll go on to the next one here. But that's where the database log is located. And again, mainly you'll see these .error files that you want to review in terms of looking at any kind of database issue. Next thing is the application server. The application server is also located in the install directory, but it's in OWare JBoss 5.1 server OWare.log. And again, I'm going to use this command here to go and look at that. I'm doing ls here. So you see there's various server logs here, and generally every time you restart the server or every day a new one will be generated, but the one that's current is always called server.log. And so this is where you can do, if I do a tail -f on the server.log, this is where you can, I don't know if it will scroll through any information. Generally if you have an error on your application, you would bring it up and you would do something like a resource and then do something that would, if it were going to fail, you do like a file management back. Errors, or not errors, but you'll start seeing the information start scrolling through this. And so this is, again, a very useful thing And as you see here, it failed to gather SFTP, SCP protocol support. So there's something going on here with the SCP, FTP support, but you can quickly see that. And if you have a question about that, again, this is something to correlate with your actual user activity. So there's the tail F command, but you can also do, if you just want to see the last 100 lines of the server log, you can go tail -100, and this is going to be more of a static file. It's just going to show you the last 100 lines. That's also useful. And then there's also, you can also, this is on Linux, but you would do the same thing on a Windows box. You can do it on Linux. I'm going to use VI. If you want to see the entire log, do a VI, and it's going to show the whole log, and then you can just scroll through it. This is what I'm doing here. And so you would do the same thing with Notepad on Windows or something like that, but it's generally what you would do there. Okay. So that's the application server log on how to get to it. Again, these can be correlated, web server issues in the database or the web server or the application server may show up here as well. So, this is just a useful place to look as well. There's some information here on Windows. Okay, at the top of the stack here, we have the web server. The web server logs are located in installed directory OWare Synergy logs. And again, you can do cd to OWare root Synergy logs, and it's the same kind of thing. This is going to be mainly for the web server. I'm going to do an ls here. Oops, ls. And here you see a whole bunch of Synergy type logs. And these are basically on a date type system here. So you see the last one here is the Synergy log. And you won't see a lot here unless you unless there are particular issues. And so it's the same thing. Let's just take a look at one. Synergy 201N7. Just look at one here. All right, nothing in that one. Oh, I didn't put the right data in here, 02. All right, so just one line there, but it's the same thing as with the application server. As things start to happen in here, you'll see different information. I'll show you a couple of examples of logged information that you might be interested in here. Okay, so let's go just take a quick look at some example logs. And so let's just take a look at one, for example. Here's an application server log, and so here's an example here of a database that's full. And so you see here, the first exception here is there is a Java SQL, and you see notification history is full. That's an indication that your database is full. That is seen in the application server. Let's look at another one here. And again, what I do recommend is if you want to look at these logs, is look at them when they're under normal operating conditions. Normally what you're going to see is a lot of this type of thing up here with just periodic information being spit out, telling you about the partition and the server type and the various things. And so once you get a feel for what a normal log looks like, then you'll be able to spot the exceptions. And so here's one here where we see some task failed, and you're getting some various information here. Please check the stack trace, and so you look at the stack trace here, and a lot of times you look at the cause by, there's unknown errors, and sometimes there are just unknown things that weren't able to be caught properly, and so this is where we start looking at, we really need some expertise on the development side to come and look at some of this stuff. You see some HTTP stuff also being put in your protocol type things, and so it's another example. What else? Look at this one here. Here's another one where you see an error, and it's actually saying SNMP error, and so it is wrapping around here, but it says the name of a requested object was not found. It's an indication that maybe we're querying for something that's not there, or we try to do a discovery and it couldn't find something. So other useful things that help you narrow this down here is you'll see not only is it SNMP, but then you start seeing things like device driver. And even further down, you see it's a Force 10 device driver. So another indication that this is correlated to something happening with a Force 10 device. Gives you a little bit more information there. And so, again, you can see these can get quite long here, and they may not all be useful. And so, again, start at the top if you can. Okay, that's an example of a application server error. Here's one for Synergy that you might see. In this case, you're seeing some of these things called Hessian runtime exception. Again, it's difficult to make sense out of these unless you know about the application in some detail. But those are the kind of things you might see. Here's one with a socket timeout. Indicates some issue with the web server service. Okay. The last thing here I wanted to talk about was the CLI trace, and there's some information here on how to do this. And I'm going to talk about it, and then I'll show you some sample trace files. But again, we want to use this when you suspect a device-specific issue where we're trying to go to the device and we're not getting some response, and we need to look at that interaction in some detail. So basically, the steps are here is you need to stop the app server, med server, and then we're going to restart it. But we're going to add this following line here to a property file, and so I'll show you that. And so again, I'm going to, whoops, just show you that real time here. I'm going to VI the file. So again, I'm going to ORAPS install props, lib install properties. This is a standard properties file that we use. No, I didn't have anything in it. Get that out here. Just going to CD that directory, make sure I'm in the right spot. Going away. I'm not in the right area here. Sorry about all my clickety-clacking here. Okay, so there's my install.properties file. Look at that. And so scroll down here and you'll see, I think I put it on here. So here's the two lines you need to add here. Where easy mediation, enable packet level trace equal to true. Or easy mediation, enable debug is equal to true. Once you do that and you restart the application server, you'll start getting some log files. And we go to our OR, I'm going to put the path in here. So again, it's the install directory and it's called OR temp. Do an ls there. You'll see these files called CLI. And let's just take a look at one. And these are CLI trace files. And so we'll see here 219_10 _128. I'm going to have 2 here. 95. Okay, so this is a normal file, and you'll see here what we're doing is we're logging into this box here with the IP address, and you actually see the password that's being passed. You'll see the port number, you'll see the protocol number, and some various other information at a very detailed level. And so sometimes when there's an issue with the prompt or what we're getting back from the box, it will be revealed in this file. Again, I don't expect anybody to be able to make sense, a lot of sense of this file, but it is useful for development to look at and see, you know, line by line what is being sent to the device and what kind of information is being sent back. And so what you'll see is if there is an error in a particular command line, you'll see this dash, this E on the end. So just note that if there's no error, you won't see anything, but if there is an error caught in there, you will see that in here. Okay. All right, so that's a high-level walkthrough on the main log files to look at. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions now. And again, these can be questions on troubleshooting, or these can be questions on anything really OMNM related. So just feel free to type it into the chat window, and we'll answer those questions. Okay, there's one question here about more detailed logging. There are quite a number of other logs that happen to get created, and I think I put some on here. So you'll see some web server logs down here, the area to go to look at some of those. And so like there's one in Tomcat, that's basically the web server again. Log files are something called Catalina.out type things, and so you'll see these files. So there's some other log files we can look at. Again, this is getting a little more into some advanced features, and some of this is best left for our development and support to troubleshoot. One other thing to be aware of is you may be asked to turn on some more debugging so we can get more logs. And so there's this on the admin portal, admin page, there's this thing called log categories, and someone may ask you to turn on, for example, if development knows that there's a particular issue in the alarms and we're not capturing the right debug, we can turn on various levels of debug, and we'll be asked to. You also want to turn these off when they're done because they'll spew a lot of information that may not be pertinent. And so you'll be asked to add some levels here of error debugging, and this is real time, and it should take effect in the application server. You'll start seeing it capture different levels of logging, and so that's maybe helpful at some point too. One thing that I didn't mention on the CLI trace was you need to turn that off as well, because every time you do a command line action, whether it's a backup, a restore, a CLI action, it's going to log another file, and you'll just keep growing. You'll get literally thousands of files, so you do want to turn that off as well. You can do that very easily in that file by putting a pound sign in front of it in that install.properties file. Okay, any other questions? Someone's asking about the get logs file and that it can be very large, and how you can't email it. That's a very good point, because a lot of places are restricting the size of files you can send out, and they can be quite large. So if that were to come up, and we still need the log files, we would instruct you to a FTP site to upload those logs so that we can analyze those. Okay, let me see here. I'm looking at some questions. Are there any special tips for discovering a Windows server in OMNM? Looks pretty simple. Yeah, it is pretty simple. Let's just go to our Discover tab. And what you want to do, there might be some sample ones here, but generally for Windows, what you want to do is discover it with WMI. And so you might create a credential or a discovery profile called WMI. Put in your IP address, 1.1.1.1 or whatever it is, and for the authentication, what you need to use is WMI. That's what Windows use to allow you to communicate with it. And so just put give it a credential name, and then the user ID and password and domain also need to be populated. So generally, you're going to need to be an administrator to get this information. So it would be something like, my administrator user ID, my administrator password, and then the domain or workspace, if there is one. There may not be in some cases. You may not be using a domain. So once you do that, it'll go out through WMI and persist that as a server object, and it'll bring it under inventory like any other device. And this is similar for not only Windows servers, but also for WebM. WebM is kind of an analogous to Linux servers. If you want to discover a Linux server, generally WebM is the protocol you want to use, and that's here. And you can do the same thing, give it user ID and password, and you should be able to discover those Linux boxes. And so same with Windows, you do need to have those protocols turned on. Generally, Windows already has WMI turned on. Linux is questionable. Sometimes the WebM is not configured, and just got to make sure that's on so you can discover it. All right, hopefully that answered your question. If you have any more questions on the server discovery, let me know. Any other questions? Again, they can be OMNM troubleshooting related or any other topic. How to troubleshoot WMI is not working. Most of the troubleshooting around WMI is going to be around the credentials. I can show you a utility here that's built into OMNM. If I don't think I have the install here, I'll talk about it. Let me write this down on the screen here in the notepad so you can see it. There's a tool built into OMNM called WMI Util, and I would need to be on a Windows box right now. I'm on a Linux box, so I don't have access to that. And so if you execute that command on the command line, it'll bring up a GUI that will allow you to put in the same information as you put into the screen in our credential, but it would allow you to do is see if it's actually failing through that tool or not. So typically it's a credential problem in that you don't have the credential quite right, or you didn't put the domain right, or something like that. That's typically the problem, but that's generally the level of troubleshooting. What you might also do is capture the logs, as I mentioned. As you go to try to discover it, capture the log that's being thrown out in the application server. And if it might have some information there describing what the problem is, if there's some bug in the software, or if there's something else going on, that might help. So I would recommend doing what we just talked about in the application server. Try the WMI util, and then try it again through discovery. And as you discover, capture that application server log using that tailf command to see if anything is thrown out in that log. That might be the best way to troubleshoot it at this point. Okay, and so if you continue to have WMI problems, again, this is a good opportunity to report a bug, or bring our support online. And I'm happy to stay on after this call. If you want to shoot me an email, again, you can send something to. I would recommend going to support. And actually, I'll go back to my PowerPoint here. If you send an email directly to support at Dell-OMNM.com. It will come. I will see it, and you'll get a funnel to both of those come into our tracking system, and they'll get handled by support personnel on site here. It sounds like we might need to have an online session to try to figure out what's going on if you continue to have problems. Does OMNM have to be installed on a Windows box for WMI discovery? I would say on the surface, the answer is yes, because WMI has to be supported by the operating system in order to use WMI. Now, with that said, I know that Linux has, I don't know how recently, has come up with a WMI compatibility type tool that can be loaded onto a Linux box. And potentially that could be used on a Linux box to discover WMI servers. So I would say generally the answer would be yes. You need both systems, OMNM and the target system, need to support WMI protocol, like any protocol. It would need to be supported there. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up today. I'm going on almost 30 minutes here. Had some good questions, and I look forward to talking with you next time.